Hey there, good people, it's your Crippled Critic, and this week I want to talk about the new God of War game. So, at the time of doing this video, it's been several months since the game's been released, and I know that, but this channel hasn't always been about reviewing the newest games, so yeah, plus I really wanted to talk about it. They added a lot of interesting stuff. So, here we go. Technically, this God of War is the 8th installment in the series. It was developed by Santa Monica Studio in association with Sony Interactive Entertainment. I think it's safe to say that this God of War is a soft reboot of sorts, aiming for a more mature tone, but also the main character is a little more mature. Gone is the hit first, ask questions later Kratos, but I'll get more into that later. Considered a reimagining for the franchise, God of War is loosely based on Norse mythology this time around, unlike previous games that were based in Greek mythology. The gameplay in this God of War is also changed. For one, Kratos has a magical battle axe called Leviathan instead of his signature chain blades. Kratos uses the Leviathan to defeat enemies, hit faraway objects, and solve puzzles. The Leviathan can be thrown at enemies and brought back to you at will. They even changed the core gameplay in this God of War game. Unlike in previous games, which kind of had a fixed camera and hack and slash gameplay mechanics, this newest God of War has more of a third-person action game with RPG elements. Also, Kratos now has a son. His name is Atreus. He's pretty young, so it basically puts you in a mentor position throughout the game, but Atreus can assist you during combat. I think what really surprised me about his character was how helpful he really was when you needed him. My physical impairments make it kind of hard to throw the Leviathan at faraway enemies, and Atreus using his bow and arrow really does help. For me, hitting flying enemies is kind of impossible, so having the option to have your son do it is kind of cool. You can upgrade your son's armor, weapons, and skill sets too. You can also upgrade your own armor and skill sets. Now on to the accessibility in the game. Oh man, is there a lot to talk about. I'm happy to say that the gameplay in God of War has been completely overhauled, but in particular, a huge effort was put into making the game more accessible for disabled gamers. To start off, God of War has a more robust choice of difficulty modes and customizable controls. There are 4 difficulty modes to choose from in God of War. They have very straightforward titles that range from give me a challenge to give me a story. The latter is the equivalent of an easy mode, which is light on combat and focuses on the story. In the options menu, you can choose from several different control configurations. The default setting has the X button to interact, the circle button to dodge, the square button to give directions to your son, and the triangle button to recall your axe. L1 and L2 are used to aim and block, while R1 and R2 are used for light and heavy attacks. However, you can choose from 2 other control configurations that let you swap the trigger buttons with the symbol buttons if you want. A new feature I'm really happy about is the ability to customize the Spartan Raids feature. Now, Spartan Raids was an ability that put you in a berserker mode. It gives you a lot more strength and agility for a brief amount of time. In the previous games, I had never been able to fully beat any enemy or boss with Spartan Raids without help from an able-bodied person. And that was because it required you to press L3 and R3. But now, in this game, it lets you swap L3 and R3 for the X and circle buttons. Man, it feels awesome now to be able to get into this mode without any help. For added convenience, God of War now has a separate accessibility tab included within the options menu. It has great new features like replacing the chiseling door gameplay, which used to require precise directional input, with just a single button press. Speaking of button presses, the God of War series is kinda known for its intense quick time events during combat. Disabled gamers with fine motor skill impairments like me had an extremely tiring and challenging experience dealing with these moments, to say the least. I remember even the first Hydra battle in the first game was so hard just because you were repeatedly tapping the button really fast, and I wasn't something I could do on my own. But now, the new game allows you the option to press and hold a single button instead of having to tap the button repeatedly. Man, does that help. I do think that disabled gamers with fine motor skill impairments will have a lot less stress when playing the game. Now, God of War's new gameplay isn't perfect. I know I mentioned before that the new axe you wield, the Leviathan, lets you throw it and recall it back to you, and I had trouble using this feature. It doesn't have much of an aim assist when you're aiming the Leviathan, but Atreus is there for support during combat. However, you also have to use the Leviathan to solve puzzles, and that's where I had the most trouble in the game. Which is funny because puzzles are usually the easiest part of a game for me. Puzzles don't usually require much physical effort, but although God of War improved the accessibility during combat, many of the puzzles require timing, fast movement, and precise aiming. For instance, some of the puzzles require you to throw the Leviathan at a rune in order to lock a mechanism in place. There was one puzzle that had me stuck for almost an hour because I had to throw the axe really fast and quickly get to safety, and my hands would not move that quickly. Also, there are collectible runes throughout the environment that require you to aim your axe, sometimes in a timed fashion. Now, a lot of these collectibles were impossible for me to search for, but the good thing is these are entirely optional. Overall, the gameplay is much more accessible this time around for disabled gamers with fine motor skill impairments. You shouldn't have too much trouble playing God of War. On the visual side of things, God of War lets you completely customize the heads-up display. You can stick with the default setting, have a more minimalistic setting that only has important HUD features displayed, or turn off the HUD completely. There's also a brightness slider you can alter in the options menu. I didn't notice any important items that were distinguished solely by their colors, so colorblind gamers shouldn't have any trouble. Deaf players and those with hearing impairments have a multitude of options to choose from in God of War. In the audio settings, you can raise and lower each individual volume level within the game. This includes the music volume, dialogue, and sound effects. There's also subtitles available, and a large amount of ways to manipulate them. In the accessibility options menu, you can choose whether you want subtitles to have a light background or a dark background. You can also turn on something called Subtitle Speaker, which is similar to captions and lets the player know who is speaking regardless of whether the character is on screen or not. So really quick, I do want to say that at the time of me doing this video, developers added the option to resize subtitles, which was not a feature included when the game was launched. I heard that many players were having trouble reading the small font, so thankfully the developers responded to the feedback. Even so, some players reported that there were errors popping up with the resizing tool. As far as I know, the developers addressed these issues with a patch later. So after they listened to player suggestions and fine-tuned their subtitles, I don't think there are any obstacles for gamers with hearing impairments. So the story in this God of War is pretty different from the other games. Kratos is in a whole new world, in a new Viking world, also sporting a new sexy beard. Kratos is now a father who has to take control of his emotions in order to keep his son safe in a completely new place. He has to journey with his son Atreus to the highest peaks of the 9 realms in order to spread the ashes of his late wife. Along the way, he'll fight gods and monsters, learn the value of patience, and understand that anger and rage aren't the only tools for survival. So I'll be honest with you guys, it was kind of jarring getting used to this new version of Kratos, and I don't just mean the way he looked, I mean his attitude. Like, it's really weird looking back at the old games, coming from a Kratos that would bang or kill whatever got near him, to this new Kratos that's like a calm, collected dad. Like, I understand that it was supposed to be a reboot, but for a while it just seemed like a drastic change. I think what helped is that developers chose not to ignore these big changes to Kratos' character. Not to get into spoiler territory, but a big part of Kratos' character development in this game is understanding that his old way of thinking, which only led to destruction, is not going to help him in this new world. He was powerful before, but in the Norse mythology world, he's nowhere near as powerful as some beings. and it's not going to help him to keep doing what he used to do for him or his son. And that's something I can get behind. I also thought it was a nice touch to have Kratos literally being stalked by the mistakes of his past. It's a cool way to acknowledge the old Kratos that we know and love. And on a personal note, I really do like the Norse mythology creatures and gods. It's pretty cool. So it's great to see another big name studio tackle accessibility like this. I do think that Sony is putting more and more pressure on their studios to make games more accessible, just like Uncharted and even Hellblade. But I know they seriously improved the experience for disabled gamers. I can't tell you how great it feels to finally be able to play a God of War game without help from any able-bodied person. The gameplay could still do with some improvements, but having easier quick-time events and customizable controls make the combat less challenging for disabled gamers. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. Sorry it's been so long since I've made a video. You should be getting more videos soon at a better rate than what I've been putting out. I've been really busy, and I will get to some really cool things I want to try soon. But anyway, thanks again for watching, and I will see you later.